I'll never forget the sound of the door slamming against my back. It was a hard, brutal sound, as if that one slam shut my entire life out of the house I had built with my own hands. I fell to the ground, onto the cold concrete, while my son-in-law, his eyes full of hate, screamed at me, "You're going to die in the street, you filthy old man. Don't you ever set foot here again." My daughter was behind him, shaking, not from fear, but from shame. Shame of me. When I tried to speak, when I tried to tell her I'd only come to get my medication, she cut me off with a voice I'll never forget. "You heard my husband, Dad. Get out. We don't want you here." And then he, that man I once called a dear son, took my pictures, my shirts, the mementos of my late wife, and threw them onto the sidewalk. With a cruel smile, he stomped on them, one by one. "That's to remind you who's in charge here," he said, before giving me a kick that knocked the wind out of me. The physical pain was nothing compared to the other kind, the kind that digs in deep inside, in the deepest part of your chest. I stayed on the ground, staring at the pieces of my life scattered on the sidewalk, not understanding how I'd gotten to this point. I had given them everything, and still, there I was, tossed out like a piece of trash while my daughter closed the curtain so she wouldn't have to see me anymore. I struggled to my feet, my knees trembling, holding a suitcase that felt weightless because it had almost nothing left inside. I walked without looking back. Night was falling, and the rain was starting to fall too, as if the sky wanted to join me in my misery. But before we continue, I'd like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you like this story. It helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I do from the heart. Now, let's continue. I walked until my body gave out. The city looked huge, crueler than ever. Nobody looked at the old man shuffling his feet, soaked to the bone, his dignity shattered. I thought about taking shelter in the bus station, but the security guard kicked me out. I ended up on a park bench under a streetlight that flickered as if it too was tired of living. There, with the distant noise of cars and the smell of wet earth, my mind began to fill with memories. I saw my wife Clara's face, smiling at me like when we first moved into that house. I remembered how we painted the walls together, how we planted a tree in the backyard the same day our daughter was born. That tree must be over 30 years old by now, and I was its old, twisted shadow. I couldn't understand it. My daughter, my only daughter, the same one I carried on my shoulders when she was learning to walk, the one who'd get sick and make me sleep by her bed, the same one I worked myself sick for, just to pay for her college. When did she turn into someone capable of throwing me out like that without an ounce of pity? The answer hurt to admit. The moment she met her husband, that arrogant man who came into my life with fake smiles and empty promises. At first, he seemed nice, a decent, hard-working young man. But soon I started to notice his condescending tone, his gestures of superiority, the way he looked at her as if she were his trophy. I put up with it for my daughter's sake, because I thought he would mature with time. I was wrong. What matured was his cruelty. That night, the cold got into my bones. I tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. I could only think of one phrase, repeating itself over and over. They took everything from you, but they can't take who you are. And even though I felt defeated right then, a small spark started to burn inside me. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper. It was a promise. I promised I wouldn't die there, on the street. I promised that someday, somehow, they would understand what they had done. I wasn't looking for revenge, at least not yet. I was looking for something that would hurt more. Reflection. That one day they would look in the mirror and feel shame. That they would understand that the old man they threw out was the same one who gave them a roof, food, and a name. The dawn found me awake, my clothes damp, my body aching. A little boy walking by with his mother looked at me with pity. She pulled him away quickly, as if I were a dangerous shadow. And it was in that moment, watching them walk away, that I decided. I wasn't going to stay like this. I wouldn't be just another old man abandoned by his family. I would get up, even if it was the last thing I did. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but I took the first step. And even though the freezing wind whipped my face, something inside me ignited. I knew that one day I would return to that house, not as the defeated man who left that night, but as the one who returns to teach the greatest lesson of all, that betrayed love turns into strength, and dignity, when it's reborn, does not forgive being forgotten. Sleeping on the street isn't just about the cold or the hunger. It's a silent battle with your mind. The nights are endless. The hours stretch out as if time itself wants to torture you. You hear footsteps, cars, whispers. Everything seems distant, as if the world keeps spinning while you're left suspended in a forgotten corner. That first week was hell. I learned that loneliness has a sound. The wind rustling through the trees, the raindrops hitting the roof of a bus stop, the echo of a voice that's no longer there. I spent my days on the same park bench near a fountain where kids threw coins and made wishes. I watched them and thought that, once upon a time, I was one of them, believing that all it took was closing your eyes and dreaming for everything to come true. Now I understood that life doesn't grant wishes, it collects on them with interest. Hunger became my worst enemy. It wasn't just physical, it was a feeling of total emptiness. I ate what I could, scraps of bread, a cold coffee someone sometimes left on the bench. The body gets used to surviving, but the soul doesn't. Every time the sun went down, the image of my house came to mind, of my chair by the window, of my daughter serving me tea on winter afternoons. And even though that image hurt me, it was the only thing that kept my heart beating. One especially cold night, when the wind seemed to cut through my bones, I found myself talking. I was talking to Clara, my wife. "If you could see me, my love," I whispered, "if you could see me now, sitting on this bench like a beggar." I imagined her voice answering me sweetly. "Get up, Arthur. Don't give them the power to see you fall." I closed my eyes and I could smell her, feel her presence, as if she were sitting right next to me. That feeling, for just a moment, gave me back the strength I had lost. But before we continue, I'd like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you liked this story. It helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I do from the heart. Now, let's continue. The following days were a parade of indifferent faces. I learned to recognize the look of someone who sees you but pretends not to. In society, homeless old people are ghosts. We exist, but no one wants to remember it. However, one afternoon, something changed. I was picking up some scraps from behind a diner when I heard a voice behind me. "Arthur, is that you?" I turned around and saw a tall man, gray hair, elegant suit. It took me a few seconds to recognize him. It was Frank, an old friend from my youth. We'd worked construction together more than 30 years ago. His expression froze when he saw me. "My God, Arthur, what happened to you?" he asked with a mix of shock and sadness. I didn't know what to say. I lowered my head, ashamed. "Life, Frank. Life ran me over." He took me by the arm without saying another word and led me to his car. I didn't have the strength to resist. During the drive, he didn't speak and neither did I, but I could feel him looking at me out of the corner of his eye, that look that mixes pity with respect, as if he was trying to understand how a man who was once strong and dignified had ended up on the street. When we got to his house, he sat me down at a table and served me a hot plate of food. I don't remember the last time I'd tasted real food. As I ate, my hands were shaking so much I had to hold the fork with both of them. "You don't have to tell me anything if you don't want to," he said, "but I want you to know I'm not leaving you like this." I looked him in the eyes. In them, I saw something I thought was lost: humanity. That night I slept in a clean bed with warm sheets in the gentle silence of a home. I didn't sleep soundly. The body rests, but the mind stays alert. Still, I was grateful for every second of that truce. The next morning, Frank took me for a walk in his yard. He told me about his life, about how he'd become a lawyer, about his late wife, about his kids who lived far away. At one point, he stopped and said to me, "Don't ask me why, but I feel like fate brought you to me for a reason." I looked at him, not quite understanding. "What reason could there be, Frank?" "Maybe to give you a second chance," he replied with a slight smile, "and also to settle accounts with the past." That phrase echoed in my head for the rest of the day. A second chance? At my age? After so much pain? But something inside me, a tiny spark, lit up again. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe life still had one more page written for me. That night before sleeping, I prayed to God that if He let me get back up, it wouldn't be to destroy, but to bring justice. Not to get revenge, but to get back my name, my dignity, my place in the world. And with that thought, I fell asleep, my heart calm for the first time in a long, long time. I woke up early that morning. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel my body numb or the weight of hunger crushing my chest. The sun came through the window and rested on my hands, those same cracked hands that had once built a house, brick by brick, and were now resting on a clean blanket. I stared at them for a long time. I thought about everything they had done, how they had raised a family, a home, a future, and how, in a single instant, they had lost it all. Frank came into the room quietly, holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Good morning, old friend," he said, his voice deep but kind. "You look better today." I took the cup carefully. "I don't know about better, but different at least." He smiled and sat down across from me. "Different is a good start." We sat in silence for a while, looking out the window. Outside, the yard was filling with light, and the singing of the birds seemed almost like a miracle. After so much time among the filth, the rain, and the contempt, that simple sunrise felt like redemption. When I finished my coffee, Frank looked at me with a new seriousness. "Arthur, I need you to tell me everything, no holding back. What happened to you? How you ended up on the street?" I hesitated for a moment. It was hard to put the humiliation into words, but his gaze wasn't one of judgment. It was one of understanding. And so, in a low voice, I told him everything. From the day my son-in-law first walked through my door to the night he threw me out like a dog. As I spoke, I felt the wounds opening up again. I told him the details, my daughter's tone, the sound of the photos breaking, the final slam of the door. Frank didn't interrupt. He just listened, his brow furrowed, his eyes filled with indignation. When I finished, I fell silent, exhausted. He stood up and paced a few steps. Then he turned back to me. "Arthur, do you realize that, legally, that house is still yours?" I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I checked the public records this morning. I remembered you telling me years ago that you bought it before your daughter's marriage, and even if you made a verbal agreement, they never filed a transfer. As far as the law is concerned, it's still in your name." I felt the air stop in my lungs. I mean, he interrupted, "that bastard didn't just humiliate you. He's living under a roof that belongs to you." I didn't know what to say. I sat perfectly still, staring into space. Something lit up inside me that I couldn't describe. It wasn't joy, and it wasn't revenge. It was as if a sleeping part of my soul had just woken up. "Frank," I said quietly, "I don't want to become a bitter man, but I don't want to die with this weight on me either." He came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Then don't die, Arthur. Get up. Get justice, not for pride, but for dignity." His words shot through me like thunder. I thought about that all day while he made calls and reviewed papers. I watched him in silence, moving with a cold, elegant precision. His office was full of law books, diplomas, old photographs. He seemed like a man who had won all his battles, and yet his face had something I understood well, the sadness of someone who had also lost something he loved. When he returned to the living room, he handed me an envelope. "Here's everything we need to get started," he said. "But before we act, I want you to be sure. This isn't just a simple procedure. It's the start of something bigger." I opened it carefully. Inside were copies of deeds, legal documents, and a letter signed by a notary. "Everything's in perfect order. How did you do it so fast?" I asked, surprised. "Let's just say the years taught me how to move without making a sound," he replied with a half smile. "But before we continue, there's something I need to know. Do you want to do this for justice or for revenge?" I looked him straight in the eye. It took me a few seconds to answer. "For justice," I said finally, "because I want my daughter to understand what she did. I want her to see the price of her silence." Frank nodded slowly. "Then we'll do it your way. No shouting, no violence, no resentment. We'll bring them down with the truth." I couldn't sleep that night. I paced back and forth in the room, the envelope in my hand. I looked at the documents over and over, trying to understand how fate, which had crushed me so mercilessly, was now offering me a hand. I thought about my wife. If she were alive, she would have smiled to see this, not because of the money or the house, but because she always believed that justice, sooner or later, comes to those who act with a clean heart. Before getting into bed, I opened the window. Outside, the sky was covered in stars, and for the first time in months, I felt I wasn't alone. The wind brought me a phrase I thought I heard in my mind. They're not giving you back what you lost, Arthur. They're giving you back the chance to be who you were. I closed my eyes and smiled, because maybe, just maybe, fate was giving me something more valuable than a house. It was giving me the right to look at the world again, without lowering my head, to feel alive again. Feeling alive again was harder than I imagined. The body gets used to the pain, but the soul takes longer to heal. I spent the first few days after talking with Frank in silence, as if every word he'd said had to settle inside me. The idea of getting back what was mine, of returning to that house not as a beggar but as its rightful owner, gave me strength, but also fear. Fear of facing my daughter again, fear of looking into the eyes of the one who had forgotten me without flinching. Frank helped me with everything. He took me to a doctor. He got me exams and treatment. I discovered that, despite everything, my heart was still steady. It's worn out, but it's strong, the doctor said. That phrase seemed like a perfect metaphor for my life. He also got me new clothes and a temporary job at one of his construction companies. The first time I held a tool after so many years, my hands trembled, not from weakness, but from emotion. It was like rediscovering a part of myself I thought was lost. During the day, I'd watch the young men working alongside me. They complained about the heat, the exhaustion, the long shifts, and I watched them in silence, thinking about how much I would give to be 20 years younger and have the chance to start over. I wasn't judging them. I just saw myself reflected in them, remembering the man I used to be, strong, determined, a dreamer. Every day when the shift ended, I went back to the small room Frank had prepared for me. It was simple, but it had the most important thing: peace. I'd turn on an old lamp, pour myself a cup of tea, and write in a notebook. There, I began to capture my thoughts, my memories, and little by little, my plans. Not plans for revenge, but for life. One night, while I was writing, Frank came in without knocking. "Still awake, huh?" he said, his tone half serious, half fatherly. "Yeah, I have trouble sleeping. I guess when you start to feel hope again, sleep slips away." He chuckled and sat down across from me. "I've been thinking, Arthur. We have everything ready to act legally, but I want you to be prepared. This is going to stir things up. Your daughter is going to cry, she's going to scream, and your son-in-law, well, your son-in-law is going to fight like a cornered wolf." I looked at him in silence, with a mix of calm and determination. "Frank, I'm not looking to destroy them. I just want them to understand what they did, that you don't build a life by humiliating the person who loved you." He nodded, as if he understood more than I was saying. "Then we'll do this with elegance. No shouting, no scandals, just the truth." I kept thinking about that word, truth. So many times I had stayed silent out of love. So many times I had preferred silence to avoid conflict. But I understood that staying silent is also a way of dying. Sometimes you have to speak, even if it hurts, even if your voice shakes. That night I dreamed of Clara. We were in the garden of the house, the same one she cared for with so much love. Her hands were full of soil, and when she saw me, she smiled. "You've returned to your roots," she said. "The earth doesn't forget the one who planted it." I woke up with tears in my eyes, but also with a peace I hadn't felt in years. It was as if she was telling me that the path I was taking was the right one. The weeks passed, and my body began to respond better. I walked more upright, I breathed without pain, and even my face changed. One day I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. The defeated man was gone. In his place was someone with fire in his eyes and resolve in his voice. But before we continue, I'd like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you liked this story. It helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I do from the heart. Now, let's continue. One afternoon, while we were having coffee, Frank said, "I've been looking into something else. Your son-in-law, besides taking your house, has been using your assets as collateral on loans he can't pay back. If we wanted to, we could leave him in ruins." I looked at him and felt a pang in my chest, not of guilt, but of compassion. "No, Frank. I don't want to see him ruined. I want to see him face himself. I want him to look in the mirror and see what he really is. Money can be recovered, but shame, that will mark him for life." Frank watched me in silence, nodding slowly. "You're a more noble man than I thought, Arthur." "No, my friend. I just learned that hate destroys the one carrying it more than the one receiving it." From that day on, everything started to change. Frank moved his influences discreetly. He spoke to a judge, prepared documents, reopened records. And while he handled the legal world, I handled the emotional one, strengthening my spirit, preparing myself to look at my daughter without hate. One afternoon, while walking through the park, I saw an old woman feeding pigeons. I sat down next to her, and she smiled at me. "You have the look of someone who's starting over," she said. "Maybe," I replied. "Sometimes life rips us out by the roots just to plant us better." She nodded as if she'd been waiting to hear that her whole life. When I got back to the house that night, I found Frank in the dining room with a folder open on the table. He looked at me with that expression that mixes satisfaction and respect. "It's all ready, Arthur. All it needs is your signature." I took a deep breath and picked up the pen. I held it steady, feeling the weight of the years, the weight of my story. And as I signed, I knew that something inside me was closing. The humiliated old man was dying right there, in that ink. In his place, the man who had found his voice again was born. Sometimes justice doesn't arrive with noise or fury. Sometimes it comes in silence, disguised as patience, walking slowly but surely. Frank used to tell me that every time I got desperate to see results. "Time is a wiser judge than we are, Arthur," he'd repeat. "We just have to give it the right evidence." And that's what we were doing, giving time what it needed to play in our favor. Every day, Frank would explain a bit more of what we were building. It wasn't a simple legal case. It was a perfectly woven net of documents, statements, and calculated silences. We weren't going to barge into their house or confront them head on. No, we were going to knock on the door of their conscience and the courts. During those weeks, I became his shadow. I went with him to the office, watched how he drafted motions, how he spoke with a calm that commanded respect. In every move, there was an invisible strategy. I didn't understand much about laws, but I did understand construction. And this, in a way, was the same thing. Building something solid, brick by brick, until no lie could tear it down. One morning, Frank handed me an envelope with several papers. "Here are the copies of the deeds to your house, certified by the notary. No transfer was ever registered, not to your daughter, not to your son-in-law. You are still the absolute owner." I took the envelope with trembling hands, not from fear, but from the weight of what it meant. "Then," I said slowly, "everything they did, all their arrogance, all their contempt, was on land that still belongs to me." Frank nodded with a barely perceptible smile. "That's right. They thought they owned the world, and they don't even know they're living under your roof." That sentence shot through me like a lightning bolt. I pictured their house, their laughter, their dinners with friends, all of it built on a mistake they were about to pay for dearly. But before we continue, I'd like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you like this story. It helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I do from the heart. Now, let's continue. Frank began to gather evidence of how my son-in-law had used my assets as collateral for illegal loans. He did it all without thinking, with the arrogance of someone who believes their impunity is eternal. "He messed with the wrong person," Frank said, reviewing a document. "Sometimes justice arrives in the form of an old man, but it arrives all the same." I listened in silence, remembering every word, every insult, every gesture of contempt, not from a place of hate, but from a clear, conscious memory. It was important not to let resentment consume me. I wanted my victory to be calm, elegant, without the stain of anger. One afternoon, Frank took me to a quiet restaurant downtown. A notary was waiting for us there, along with a young man who turned out to be an investigator. "Arthur, this is Mark," Frank said. He'll be in charge of investigating your son-in-law's financial movements, all very discreetly." The young man shook my hand firmly. "I promise you, sir, your story won't remain in silence," he said. That phrase moved me more than I imagined. I thanked him with a handshake, and I understood that I wasn't alone anymore. There was an invisible network of people who wanted to help me, not out of pity, but out of respect. The following days were a mix of calm and tension. I knew something big was brewing, but I also knew I had to stay composed. I spent the afternoons walking in the park or sitting by the ocean. Sometimes I brought a notebook with me and wrote down scattered thoughts about forgiveness, about time, about dignity. I remember one sunset in particular. I was sitting watching the waves when a little boy came up to me, selling flowers. "Who are they for?" he asked innocently. I looked at him and smiled. "For someone who's gone, but who taught me everything I know about love." The boy nodded, not fully understanding, and went on his way. I stayed there, looking at the flowers in my hands. They were small, humble, but beautiful. In that moment, I knew that even though my life had been filled with wounds, there was still beauty left in it. As the days passed, Frank updated me with every new development. "Your son-in-law's in trouble, Arthur. Very soon a court officer will go to his house to notify him of a title review. He doesn't suspect anything yet, but his name is starting to pop up in the records." "And my daughter?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "She has no idea. She's living in a bubble, believing her husband has everything under control. When he falls, the whole lie will fall with him." That night, I didn't sleep. I walked the hallway of Frank's house, my heart a whirlwind of emotions. I didn't want her to suffer, but I also knew that pain is sometimes the only way to wake up. At dawn, I poured myself a coffee and went out to the yard. The fresh air brushed my face. I thought of Clara, as I always did. "Are you seeing this, my love?" I whispered. "I'm not looking for revenge. I'm looking for justice, for us, for everything we built." And the wind, gently, seemed to answer me. I didn't know if I was ready to see it again. Not my daughter, but it. The house. My house. The one I built with my own hands and the sweat of my brow. The walls I raised brick by brick, every inch designed to protect the ones I loved. Months had passed since that day they threw me out on the street, but in my mind, the echo of the slamming door was still alive. Frank told me it was important to see it again, not as a victim, but as a man. "To close a circle," he said, "you first have to face it." So I went. Not with anger, but with calm. Wearing a borrowed suit, my hair combed back, and a folder in my hand that made me look like a serious client. I presented myself as a buyer interested in properties in the area. Frank arranged the visit, pretending to be my consultant. Neither of us used our real names. When the car stopped in front of the gate, I felt a knot in my stomach. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't. The facade was painted a different color. Clara's flower pots were gone, and the old rose bush we planted together on our anniversary had disappeared. In its place was artificial turf, perfect but soulless. Frank looked at me and nodded slightly, as if telling me to be strong. I took a deep breath and rang the bell. It took a few seconds for them to open. When the door moved, he appeared. My son-in-law. The same arrogant face, the same fake smile. His gaze landed on me with feigned politeness. He didn't recognize me. "Good morning," he said, adjusting the expensive watch on his wrist. "How can I help you?" "Good morning," I replied, hiding the tremor in my voice. "We're interested in seeing the house." "We were told it's on the luxury property market." He smiled, pleased with himself. "Ah, yes. Well, I haven't officially listed it yet, but I'm always open to offers. Please come in." I walked in, and there it was. The air hit me like a living memory. I recognized every corner, every line of the ceiling, but nothing had the same soul. The paintings Clara had done were gone. In their place hung framed photographs of trips and dinners with people I didn't know. The sofa where my granddaughter used to sleep was now white, pristine, as if no one ever used it. And the smell, that warm smell of home, of fresh coffee and flowers, had been replaced by expensive, empty perfume. I walked slowly, letting my eyes take in the details. Every step was a blow to the heart. I touched the banister of the staircase, and I could still feel the tiny mark where my daughter, as a child, had carved her initials with a kitchen knife. I leaned in a bit to see if they were still there. They weren't. They had sanded it down, erased it, as if they wanted to remove every trace of what we were. My son-in-law talked non-stop, bragging about the renovations. We knocked down the old back wall, installed Italian marble in the kitchen, everything new. The house is on another level now. I nodded, faking interest, while inside everything was breaking. It must have been expensive, I said. Oh, very, he replied with an air of superiority. But money isn't a problem when you know how to manage it. Frank watched him calmly, studying him. He knew that every arrogant word he spoke would be his ruin when the time came. But before we continue, I'd like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you like this story. It helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I do from the heart. Now, let's continue. We continued the tour. We reached the backyard. Clara's tree was still there. It had grown, strong, with branches stretching toward the sky. They had wrapped it in decorative lights, but its trunk was the same. I touched the rough bark and felt a shiver. It was as if it was speaking to me. She's still here, I thought. My son-in-law watched me, never suspecting who I really was. Interested in the yard? He asked. Very much, I replied, hiding my emotion. Old trees have a history that money can't buy. He laughed. Well, some of us prefer to leave old things behind. The important thing is to move forward. I looked at him, just for an instant, and in that instant, I understood that he was already beaten and he didn't even know it. Because those who forget their roots, sooner or later, they fall. As we were walking back to the car, my daughter appeared in the doorway. My heart stopped. She hadn't changed much, but her eyes had. She had the expression of someone living between luxury and sadness. She didn't recognize me right away. Interested in buying? She asked. That's right, Frank replied politely. Your husband showed us the house. It's impressive. She smiled coldly. Yes, he's worked very hard to achieve all this. That sentence was like a dagger. He had worked hard. I was about to respond, to tell her the truth right then and there, but I held back. It wasn't the time. Revenge isn't served with shouts. It's served with silence. We said our polite goodbyes and got back in the car. During the drive, neither of us spoke. Only when the engine stopped in front of the office did Frank break the silence. Are you okay? No, I answered honestly, but now I know exactly why I'm doing this. That night, in my room, I lit a candle in front of Clara's photo. They've changed everything, my love, I whispered, but they couldn't erase the most important thing, what we were. And soon, they're going to understand that the house wasn't just walls. It was memory. It was respect. And with that promise, I blew out the candle. I didn't sleep that night. The visit to the house had stirred up more inside me than I imagined. Seeing those empty walls, the walls that once held my laughter and my wife's, turned into a cold, alien stage, was like walking on the ruins of my own life. I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the city wake up. The sky was a pale gray, holding no promises, but I knew something was about to change. I felt that time, finally, was tilting in my favor. Frank arrived early, as always, impeccable in his dark suit. He had a thick folder under his arm and a serious expression. It all starts today, Arthur, he told me bluntly. We have everything we need. Are you sure? I asked, although deep down I already knew the answer. More than ever, he said, opening the folder on the table. Inside were the original deeds, the notary certifications, and the bank documents proving how my son-in-law had used my property as collateral without my authorization. Everything legally linked, everything proven, every signature, every stamp, every date. This is a castle of lies, Frank said, tapping the papers lightly. And all we have to do is push one stone for it to all come tumbling down. I took the documents carefully, as if holding something sacred. They were just papers, yes, but they felt as heavy as all my years of effort. So what do we do now? I asked. We file the lawsuit for property restitution and financial fraud, he replied with surgical calm. As soon as the judge signs off, a court officer will go to their house with the order. I fell silent. I thought of their faces. of the moment they would hear the words, "This property does not belong to you." "Frank," I said in a low voice, "promise me there won't be a scandal." "There will be justice," he replied, and his tone allowed no argument. "But before we continue, I'd like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you liked this story. It helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I do from the heart." Now, let's continue. I spent the rest of the day in my room. I couldn't concentrate on anything else. The sound of Frank's pen in his study, the distant hum of the city, the ticking of the clock, everything seemed to be setting the stage for the inevitable. I took out my notebook, the one where I'd written my thoughts since I'd gotten back on my feet, and I started writing a letter. It wasn't for the judge or for Frank. It was for her, my daughter. "Daughter," I began, my handwriting shaking. "If you ever read this, it might already be too late to ask for forgiveness or to understand what you did. I'm not writing this from a place of resentment, but from sadness. I never wanted you to suffer, but it was necessary for you to understand what it feels like to lose what you thought was eternal. When you were little, you used to tell me I was your hero, and I was, until I stopped being one in your eyes. I don't know when that love turned into shame, or when you started to see me as a burden, but I want you to know that even on the day you threw me out, my heart kept loving you just the same. Today, life will teach you what I couldn't, and when it does, it won't be to punish you, but to remind you that dignity isn't inherited. It's learned." I set the paper aside and stared at the unfinished page. I couldn't write anymore. There was a lump in my throat, a mix of love and pain that couldn't find a way out. Frank walked in just then. He saw me with the letter in my hands and understood without asking. "Is that for her?" I nodded. "You still love her, don't you?" A father never stops loving Frank. He just learns to do it from a distance. He watched me for a few seconds and then said, "Then keep it. Give it to her when this is all over. Sometimes the truth needs silence to be heard." That night, the wind battered the windows. I couldn't sleep. I paced back and forth, remembering every stage of my life, every sacrifice, every mistake. I thought about Clara, about how she would have faced all this. "With your head held high, Arthur," she would have said, "but without hate." I sat down and wrote one final sentence at the bottom of the letter. "I'm not looking for revenge, daughter. I'm looking for you to remember who I am, because the man you threw out wasn't a burden. He was your father." I folded the paper carefully and put it in an envelope. Then, I put it in the box where I kept the dried flowers from Clara's garden, the last link to the past. The next morning, Frank arrived, his face serious but calm. "The judge signed it," he said simply. "Tomorrow an officer will go to their house. I'll be with him." I stood still, feeling my whole body tense up. It was the beginning of the end. Frank looked at me with a mixture of respect and pride. "You don't need to go, Arthur. I'll handle everything." But I shook my head. "No, Frank, I'll be there. Not as someone reclaiming something, but as someone returning to what is his." He looked into my eyes and understood. "Then prepare yourself, my friend. Tomorrow the man they threw out of his house will walk back in through the front door." I slept very little that night, but for the first time, I slept in peace, because I knew that at sunrise, the story would finally turn. I had never felt time move so slowly. That morning, every minute seemed to weigh an eternity. I got dressed in the only suit I had, the one Frank had helped me get tailored weeks ago. I ironed it carefully, combed my hair in the mirror, and took a deep breath. I wanted to look dignified, not out of vanity, but because that day represented something more than justice. It was my return to the world of the living. Frank arrived on time with his usual elegance. He carried a discreet black briefcase and an expression that mixed determination with respect. Behind him was a middle-aged man, dressed in a dark suit, holding an official folder. He had a cold, professional gaze. He was the court officer. "Ready?" Frank asked, as if he needed to hear my voice to confirm the inevitable. "Ready," I replied. The drive to the house was silent. I looked out the car window at the same streets I had walked months ago when they threw me out, but now everything was different. I was no longer the broken man walking in the rain with an empty suitcase. I was someone else, someone who had learned that pain can also be strength. When the car stopped in front of the gate, my heart hammered against my chest. There it was, my house, imposing, beautiful, but empty of soul. Clara's tree still stood firm in the yard, its branches reaching out as if waiting for my return. The officer got out first, adjusting his tie. Frank followed with a steady step. I stayed in the car for a few seconds more, looking at the facade. I touched the edge of the seat, closed my eyes, and murmured to myself, "Clara, I'm here." I got out slowly. The sound of my footsteps on the pavement echoed as if time had stopped. The man in the black suit knocked on the door 3 times. The sound reverberated in the quiet neighborhood. A few seconds passed before the door opened, and when it did, it was her who appeared. My daughter. She was dressed elegantly, but her face was tired. At first, she didn't recognize me. She looked at the officer, then at Frank, and finally, at me. Confusion crossed her gaze, followed by an imperceptible tremor. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice a thread. I didn't answer. It wasn't the time. Behind her, her husband appeared, the same man who had thrown me out, now with an expression of irritation at seeing 3 strangers at his door. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone haughty. The officer took out a document and spoke with an icy calm. "Mr. Johnson, I have a court notification. This property has been identified as legally belonging to Mr. Arthur Miller, present here." He laughed, a nervous, disbelieving laugh. "There must be a mistake," he said. "This house is mine." "No," Frank intervened, his voice firm. "This house belongs to the man you threw out months ago. The rightful owner never signed over his rights, and everything you have done since then, the loans, the renovations, the purchases, is now under judicial review." My son-in-law's face twisted. The confidence drained from his eyes, and his skin went pale as if the air had been sucked from his lungs. "This is a joke," he muttered. "It is not," Frank said, "and I advise you not to resist. The order is already signed." My daughter was staring at me, frozen, holding back tears. "Dad," she finally said, trembling, "what are you doing?" I took 1 step toward her. "I'm not doing anything, daughter. I'm just taking back what I should never have lost. My name. But before we continue, I'd like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you like this story. It helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I do from the heart. Now, let's continue." The officer entered with measured steps, followed by Frank. I stayed on the threshold, watching. Inside, the air smelled different, no longer like a home, but like expensive perfume and falsehood. I walked slowly, without looking back. I touched a wall, then the banister, the window frame. Every corner brought back memories like knives. My daughter's laughter as a child, Clara's voice calling us for dinner, the echo of a life that was gone. "This is an outrage!" my son-in-law yelled, his voice breaking. "You can't do this to me." I looked at him for the first time, straight in the eye. "I'm not doing anything to you, son," I said calmly. "I'm just returning the lesson you gave me, to know what it feels like to be left on the street." He tried to approach me, but Frank stepped between us. The officer warned him that any aggression would be reported. My daughter was crying. I wanted to hug her, but I didn't. Not yet. She had to understand. The silence grew heavy. The only sound was the rustling of the leaves outside. Then, with a firm voice, the officer announced, "As of today, this property is back in the possession of Mr. Miller." There was a moment of emptiness, an eternal second in which everyone stood motionless. My son-in-law recoiled, as white as the wall. My daughter covered her mouth with her hand. And I took a deep breath. For the first time in a long, long time. "I'm not looking to humiliate you," I said to her slowly. "I just want you to understand what respect means." I walked out into the yard and looked at the tree. The wind blew softly through the branches as if someone invisible was applauding. Frank came up and put a hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Arthur." "No," I replied. They understood. And with that, I knew that justice had spoken, not with anger, but with truth. The silence after the impact was overwhelming. No one spoke for several seconds. The only sound was the wind filtering through the cracks in the windows, as if the house itself was holding its breath. My daughter's face was covered in tears, while my son-in-law, his jaw tight, tried to maintain his composure. I was still standing in the middle of the living room, the same one where we once blew out her birthday candles, where she took her first steps, where I swore to protect her from the world. But this time, I was the one looking at her from the other side. The court officer spoke in a firm, almost impersonal voice. You have 72 hours to vacate the property. Any belongings left inside after that time will be inventoried and secured under court order. My son-in-law tried to protest, but his voice cracked. This can't be legal, he said, looking at Frank. This is an abuse. Frank didn't flinch. Everything here is legal. Signatures, records, witnesses. You used property that didn't belong to you, falsified documents, and violated your family's trust. If you insist on fighting this, you'll have to explain it to a judge. He took a step back, pale, defeated. For the first time, I saw him as fragile, small. He was no longer the man who screamed, "Useless old man," at me while breaking my photos. He was a scared little boy in the body of a corrupt adult. My daughter dropped to her knees in front of me, her eyes red, her soul shattered. "Dad, please don't do this. Don't leave us on the street." Her voice tore me apart inside. I didn't answer right away. I felt a lump rise in my throat. "On the street?" I said at last without raising my voice. "Those are the exact words you said to me when you kicked me out. Remember? Go die in the street, old man." She began to cry harder. "I didn't know what I was doing. He manipulated me, Dad. I was confused." "No," I interrupted her calmly. "You were comfortable. There's a big difference. But before we continue, I'd like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you liked this story. It helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I do from the heart. Now, let's continue." The officer and Frank began to review the final documents, signing papers, stamping forms, making sure everything was in order. I watched them move, but my mind was far away, lost in memories. I remembered my daughter's little hands when she'd tell me, "I love you, Daddy." The nights she'd wait up for me to make sure I got home safe from work. The times she'd climb on my shoulders and say she wanted to see the world from where I saw it. And I thought, when does love turn into oblivion? She was still crying. "Dad, please, don't take this from us. It's our life." I bent down slowly until I was at her level. "I'm not taking anything from you, daughter. I'm just giving you back the lesson you forgot. Life comes full circle. And when you disrespect someone, time makes a point of reminding you." Her husband turned to me, his anger simmering. "We'll get back up from this, old man." "You'll regret this." Frank took a step forward. "Watch your words. Unlike you, Mr. Miller doesn't make threats. He delivers." The man fell silent. He grabbed his coat, looked around like a cornered animal, and walked out, slamming the door. My daughter was left alone in front of me, on her knees. I helped her stand up. For an instant, our eyes met, and in them, I saw the little girl I used to pick up from school, the one who slept hugging her teddy bear. "I don't hate you, daughter," I said, my voice breaking, "but I had to do this." She nodded slowly, as if she finally understood. The officer closed his folder. "All set, Mr. Miller." Frank walked over to me, putting a hand on my shoulder. "It's done, Arthur." I nodded in silence. When we walked outside, the sky was gray. A light drizzle was starting to fall. I stopped for a moment in front of the gate and saw my daughter closing the door behind us. I knew the time she had there was short, but I also knew she needed it, to learn. As we walked to the car, Frank glanced at me. "Are you satisfied?" he asked. It took me a few seconds to answer. I don't know if satisfied is the word, but I'm at peace. We got in the car. As it pulled away, I looked back one last time at the yard. The tree was still there, strong, beautiful in the rain. It seemed like the branches were moving, as if waving goodbye. Clara always said that trees listen, that they keep the voices of the past. Maybe that tree knew that in the end, justice had bloomed. When we got to the office, Frank said goodbye with a hug. "Get some rest, old friend. You've closed a circle." I smiled, but my eyes filled with tears. Because, yes, I had closed a circle. But when you lose your daughter, even when justice is on your side, the soul doesn't celebrate. It just breathes. That night, in my room, I opened the envelope with the letter I had written to her. I hadn't given it to her, not yet. I put it away again, with a new sentence written at the end. "Maybe one day when you understand what you did, this letter will bring back the memory of the love you lost." Until then, I'll take care of you in silence." I turned off the light, sat by the window, and listened to the rain. It was the same rain that fell the day they threw me out, but this time, it didn't hurt. It was different, because this time, the rain wasn't washing away the pain. It was forgiving it. 3 weeks after that day, the phone rang at dawn. I never got calls at that hour. The sound woke me up instantly, as if someone had shaken my soul. I picked up the receiver with a mix of exhaustion and foreboding. "Hello," I said, my voice still rough. There were a few seconds of silence, then a trembling, broken voice. "Dad, it's me." I recognized her tone immediately. The world seemed to stop. There was no anger, no reproaches, no pride, just that word. Dad. One I hadn't heard spoken with sincerity in so long. "What's wrong, daughter?" I asked, holding back my own emotion. She took a deep breath on the other end. "I don't know where to start. Everything fell apart, Dad." Her voice broke. "He left. He sold the car, took the money from the accounts, and disappeared. He left me with the debts, with everything he ruined. I have nothing. No house, no job, no strength." I closed my eyes. It wasn't a surprise, but hearing it from her own mouth still hurt. "I warned you that pride has a price," I said without harshness, "and that foundations built on deceit always crumble." She started to cry. "I know, Dad. I know. You were right. And now, I don't know what to do." I listened to her sobbing on the other end, and every one of her tears pierced my soul. For a few seconds, the silence was absolute. Then I said, "Tell me where you are." "At a friend's house. I didn't want to bother you, but I have no one else to call." "You're not bothering me, daughter. You never could." I hung up the phone and stared into the emptiness of the room. The dawn light was coming through the window, painting everything in a golden hue. After so many years, that light didn't seem cold. It was warm. It was human. But before we continue, I'd like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you like this story. It helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I do from the heart. Now, let's continue. When I got to the place she told me, I saw her sitting on a park bench wearing a worn-out coat, her gaze lost. She was no longer the arrogant woman who had shut the door in my face. She was a wounded daughter, disarmed by life. When she saw me, she stood up slowly. "Dad," she murmured, "I don't even know how to look at you." I walked toward her and put a hand on her face. "Look at me the way you did when you were little," I said. "That's all." Her eyes filled with tears. We hugged. It was an awkward, trembling, but real hug. I felt her body surrender in my arms, as if she was finally letting go of the weight of the years, the pride, the lies. "Forgive me," she whispered. "You are forgiven, daughter," I replied, "since the very day you threw me out." We sat in silence. We didn't need to say much. Sometimes forgiveness isn't built with words, but with presence. I offered to let her stay with me for a while. She hesitated. "I don't want to be a burden, Dad." I smiled. "You were never a burden. You just got lost for a while." Over the next few weeks, we shared a routine. She helped me with the shopping, we cooked together, and at night we talked about simple things. About the ocean, about the weather, about Clara. One night, without warning, she asked me, "Do you miss her?" "Every day," I replied, "but sometimes I think she never really left." "Why?" "Because every time I see love win out over resentment, I feel like she's still here." She fell silent, her eyes full of tears. "Do you think she would have forgiven me?" she finally asked. "Clara didn't know how to hate, daughter. She only knew how to love. And in that, you're a lot like her, even if you don't know it yet." That night when I went to bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. It wasn't the peace of victory, but the peace of a soul that finally stops fighting. I had gotten my daughter back, not her obedience or her admiration, but something purer, her humanity. Weeks later, as we were having breakfast, she told me, "I've decided to look for a job, Dad. I don't want you to support me." I smiled with pride. That makes me happy. Not because I want you to leave, but because you're finally becoming yourself again. I looked out the window. Clara's tree was visible in the distance, strong, alive. The leaves were moving softly, and I swear that for an instant, I heard her voice in the wind. It's okay, Arthur. It's okay. And I understood that sometimes life doesn't give you back what you lost. It gives you something better, the chance to heal. The human soul is a chest full of echoes. You think you've closed certain chapters, burned certain bridges, but all it takes is one word, one look, one sigh for the past to open up again. My daughter had been with me for several weeks. Her presence had brought some warmth back to the house, and although the wound was still raw, the air felt different, lighter, more human. One night while we were eating dinner, I noticed she was distracted. She wasn't touching her food, just playing with her fork, lost in thought. "Is something wrong?" I asked. She took a long time to answer. "Dad, I need to tell you something." I looked at her without a word. "It's about Mom," she finally said, lowering her voice. I felt my heart lurch. "What about your mother?" I asked carefully. "A few days ago, while I was sorting my things, I found an old box. It had letters from her, and one was addressed to you. She never gave it to you." She stood up, went to her bag, and pulled out a yellowish envelope. She handed it to me, her hands trembling. "For Arthur. If you one day read this, it means I never had the courage to tell you in person." I recognized her handwriting. Clara. My eyes blurred before I even read a word. I broke the seal slowly, as if afraid the paper would crumble in my fingers. "Arthur, my love. I never knew how to tell you this without destroying what we built, but I need you to know the truth. The day our daughter got married, I already knew what was happening between him and her. I found out by accident, and I thought I could stop it, but I didn't have the courage. I was afraid of ruining her life. I was afraid of breaking the family. I blamed myself every day for keeping silent. If one day it all comes to light, I want you to forgive me. I wasn't an accomplice, just a coward. I loved you both, even if in different ways. And that misunderstood love was my punishment. I was speechless. The silence was total. The words burned into my mind, one by one, like knives. She knew. Clara knew, and she kept quiet. My daughter was watching me, tears in her eyes. "Dad." I had no idea. "I can't believe Mom." I didn't let her finish. I raised my hand, asking for silence. It wasn't the time to blame anyone. It was the time to understand. "Your mother kept silent to protect you," I said slowly, "and that silence killed her inside." "To protect me?" she asked, incredulous. "Yes," I replied, my voice heavy. "Because sometimes love doesn't know how to express itself with justice. She chose to carry the pain herself rather than watch it explode in front of you." My daughter covered her face with her hands. "Oh my God, Dad, all this time I judged her so wrongly." "We all did," I whispered, "even me." But before we continue, I'd like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you liked this story. It helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I do from the heart. Now, let's continue. I put the letter away carefully. I folded it and placed it inside my notebook, next to the letter I had written to my daughter. 2 truths, finally meeting. Then, I stared at the flame of the candle on the table. The fire danced slowly, as if it was breathing with me. "Daughter," I said at last, "I want you to understand something. The truth doesn't always heal, but it always sets you free." She nodded, crying. "And you? Do you forgive her?" she asked. "I already did years ago without even knowing it, because I never stopped loving her." We sat in silence. Outside, the wind was blowing, moving the branches of Clara's tree. It was as if she herself were there, listening, finally at rest. My daughter got up, walked around the table, and hugged me from behind. "Thank you for not hating her," she said quietly. "To hate the one who gave you love, even if she made a mistake, is to hate yourself," I replied. We spent the rest of the night talking about Clara. We remembered her laugh, the way she sang while she cooked, her habit of leaving fresh flowers in every corner. And we understood that love doesn't die with the body. It stays, living in the gestures, in the silences, in the forgiveness that takes too long to arrive. That night, after my daughter went to bed, I stayed alone in the living room looking at the letter. I read it one more time, not with anger, but with tenderness. And as the dawn began to paint the sky, I murmured quietly, "There are no more secrets, Clara. All 3 of us can rest now, you, her, and me." That morning, I woke up before dawn. The sky was still a bruised blue, and the city was asleep under a silence that felt as heavy as a secret. I got up slowly, made coffee, and sat by the window, just like Clara used to do whenever she couldn't sleep. For the first time in many years, the aroma of the coffee didn't taste like loneliness. There was something new in it, something warm, something like peace. Outside, the branches of the tree moved slowly, and I'd swear one of them brushed against the glass as if greeting me. "It's okay, Arthur," I heard in my mind. The same soft voice of Clara, the same one that had stayed with me even on the darkest days. My daughter was still asleep in the back room. She'd been trying to rebuild her life for weeks. She was working part-time at a bookstore downtown, and every afternoon she came home with tired eyes, but with the smile of someone starting over. She had gotten back something that money can't buy: dignity. There was no more luxury, no expensive clothes, no fancy dinners. Just a woman learning to ask for forgiveness and to forgive herself. A woman who finally understood that humility isn't defeat, but redemption. And seeing her like that, so human, gave me back some faith in life. Faith that sometimes pain has a purpose, one that only reveals itself when everything is past. I opened my notebook and took out the letter I had saved for months, the one I wrote the night before I got the house back. I unfolded it carefully. The letters were a little blurred from the tears I'd shed back then, but they were still legible, firm. I reread it in silence and decided to add something more. I wrote slowly, in large letters, trying to put into those last lines everything my heart had learned after so much. Daughter, life isn't measured by what you have, but by what you give. There was a time when I thought forgiveness was a form of surrender, but now I know it's the only path to freedom. I don't want you to live the rest of your life feeling guilty. What's past can't be changed, but what's to come can still be built. Don't try to fix what's broken, daughter. Just learn to take care of what's still standing. I put the notebook inside an envelope with her name written on the front. I didn't know when I would give it to her, maybe one day when life asked for it, maybe never. It didn't matter. The essential part had already been said, even if she hadn't read it yet. But before we continue, I'd like to know if you subscribe to the channel and if you like this story. It helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I do from the heart. Now, let's continue. I stayed there, watching the light as it slowly began to fill the window. The house, my house, was alive again. Not because of the walls or the furniture, but because there was laughter, conversation, soft music, the smell of toast and coffee. Life had returned, and it had done so in a simpler, truer way. Frank came to visit from time to time. He always brought a bottle of wine and a tired smile. He told me my story had reminded him why he became a lawyer, to defend people who still believed in justice even when the world laughed at them. That afternoon, my daughter and I went for a walk in the park. The sun was slanting across the trees, painting the leaves gold. She took my arm, just like when she was little, and we walked without rushing. She told me about her job, about the books she was reading, about how she wanted to go back to school. And as I listened to her, I understood that life always finds a way to return to the right path, even if it takes time, even if it hurts. I stopped for a moment, looked at her, and said, "Do you know what I've learned, daughter?" "What, Dad?" "That when you plant love, even if it gets stomped on, it always grows back." She smiled, her eyes filling with tears, and squeezed my hand. In that instant, I felt the entire weight of the years, of the betrayal, of the loneliness, dissolve. Clara was right. Love isn't destroyed. It just transforms. That night, while my daughter was asleep, I sat by the tree in the yard again. I had a small candle with me and a photo of Clara. I placed it at the base of the trunk and lit it. The flame flickered in the wind, but it didn't go out. I watched it for a long time, until my eyes grew damp. "We did it, my love," I whispered, not with rage, but with truth. And even though it hurt to lose so much, in the end, the only thing I have left is the best of us. The sky filled with stars, and for the first time in a long, long time, I felt my heart rest. There were no victories or defeats, just a life that, despite everything, still had meaning. I closed my eyes and listened to the whisper of the leaves, the distant song of a cricket, the sound of the wind passing through the branches. It was as if the entire universe was breathing with me. When I went back inside, I saw my daughter asleep on the sofa, a book open on her chest. I walked over quietly, gently took the book, and tucked a blanket around her shoulders. On her face, there was no longer any trace of pride or sadness, just peace. I looked at her with tenderness and thought about everything we had survived. I realized then that life hadn't given me back what I lost. It had given me something new, more fragile perhaps, but also more pure. We had learned that family isn't defined by blood or by last names, but by the capacity to forgive one another. I went up the stairs, stopped for a moment in front of Clara's photo in the hallway, and without a word, I smiled. She was still there, in every corner, in every gesture. I didn't need any more signs. Love, when it's real, never leaves. It just changes form. I turned off the lights, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Rest, my love. Everything is in its place now." And for the first time in many, many years, I slept without nightmares.